We denounce the idea that anyone should be judged, humiliated, maimed, or killed because they fail to fulfill society's illusory ideas of propriety or because they are not feminine or masculine enough. As a grassroots organization, we are committed to interrogating gender and sexuality within the context of neoliberalism, the intense privatization that surrounds those of us who live in this, one of the most intensely privatized cities in the world. Gender Just is also committed to seeking an end to gender violence, and make no mistake, harassment is violence. But we call upon our wider communities to consider what that looks like within the network of institutional violence that surrounds us all. We denounce slut-shaming and violence, but we also question exactly where our collective criticism of that might take us. We hear and understand, for instance, the push for more policing of the police who harass us. But we have to ask, can we also push for a dismantling of the police state itself? In highly public cases like that of Drew Peterson, recently indicted for murdering his wife, we hear and understand the sense of triumph on the part of many who see this as an important victory. But we are troubled by the violence of exaltation and the overinvestment in the prison industrial complex as a means to bring an end to violence. The same violence that surrounds us is this violence that is created by the police state. We ask for a deeper, more complicated understanding of harassment and violence. One that considers the violence of the state and the broader social and political factors that create and sustain violence. For instance, in recent murders of trans women in Chicago, and there have been too many, the claim is often made that they were, quote, killed for expressing their true selves. Such statements result from a personalizing of these deaths and allow us to forget the institutional violence behind them. In Chicago and elsewhere, trans sex workers are not killed for expressing themselves. They are killed because the system has failed them. These are terrible deaths, and all such acts of violence are tragic and senseless. But to say that they are murdered for simply being themselves is deeply misleading. First of all, we don't know that. What we do know is that trans people, unless they have access to privilege, suffer from a system that denies basic resources to transgender people, many of whom have no other choice but to make their living in a dangerous street economy. They are shut out of resources and quote-unquote social service agencies like the Center on Halsted, which polices them even as they get funding for their quote-unquote trans-inclusive programs. Trans people are harassed by the very cops who then, in fact, trans people in Chicago, most trans sex workers have told us that the most violence and harassment they face is from the cops, not from trans. They're harassed by the very cops who will then push for their deaths to be punished as hate crimes. And we can talk more later about hate crimes and how that pushes the prison industrial complex. But when we speak of people being harassed and killed for their identity, or for how they look, or for being too slutty, or what they looked like, all of that is important, but then we also run the risk of ignoring the greater systemic problems that puts trans people and others in danger in the first place. When we place the burden on an individual's identity, we are in effect personalizing greater systemic and societal problems. So we stand with Slutwalk in calling for an end to violence and harassment. We also call for an end to invoking the state for more and better policing as alternatives to violence and harassment. The problem with violence and harassment will not be solved by making and training better, nicer, less sexist cops. We have to understand that the entire system of policing and state surveillance is structured to take advantage of the sexism, misogyny, and economic inequality that lies at the heart of the police state. And make no mistake, ours is a police state. Gender Just stands for an end to violence and harassment, and we believe that this will only come about when we dismantle the prison industrial complex, and if we think of alternatives like transformative justice projects. Thank you. Join us.